A certain night exactly 1 month after Queen Aura of the Karpa Kingdom safely gave birth to her first child. The capital was overflowing with fires, dispelling the night and merry glee. Large bonfires were lit at the crossings of the main street or parks while here and there soldiers patrolled through the city at night, accompanied by valets carrying torches. In the business district, the majority of the taverns had lit a couple of oil pans within the store and a special night business boomed. Normally the stores wouldn't open in the middle of the night, since the light wasn't cheap and there was a good risk of the fires spreading, but today was an exception. Because tonight was a night to be remembered, where they celebrated the news that most citizens of the Karpa Kingdom had eagerly awaited, the birth of a healthy first prince. Curly hair in a glossy olive-brown tone. A big pair of black-wide eyes. Skin colored in a mixture of brown and yellow. My parental bias aside, could it be that he's the most adorable being in this world? Zenjirou was actually thinking that for real, but he was the only one who didn't realize that his opinion couldn't be biased anymore, seeing as he especially added, parental bias aside. Carlos? Looky, Lou, blee. Looking at the face of his father, who was playing the fool by sticking out his tongue from the opposite couch, the infant stared blankly for a moment, then raised a shrill voice for joy. As he liked the reaction of his son, Zenjirou then repeated it over and over and over again. Oh, he laughed. Am I funny? The baby continued to laugh happily, but the mother, who was holding him, contributed a complaint with a wry smile. Zenjirou, I can relate that you want to make Carlos laugh, but please stop doing these weird faces one after another. As your wife I cannot help but feel sad about it, even if I am his mother. For a moment, Zenjirou wanted to object with, what's the point of putting on airs at this point, but when he looked at it the other way around, he could understand Aura's standpoint a bit too. The queen gave her husband, who reluctantly ceased to do weird faces, an affectionate gaze, which differed from the one she was giving their child, and said in slightly teasing manner. Besides, why are you calling our child like that? Carlos is not his only name. You are the only one who can make the correct pronunciation for his other name, so should you not be calling him by that name? Zenjirou was a bit taken by surprise by the words of this wife and showed that on his face, but nodded. Yeah, right. Their child certainly had another name. A Japanese name that Zenjirou had given him. Zenkichi. After taking a deep breath, Zenjirou called the name in a whisper, as if breathing only a little bit of the air that brimmed his lungs out. In the end, he had given his son the name Zenkichi. Carlos Zenkichi Karpa. Normally you would be at the morning meeting already at this time, so what's up today? Zenjirou asked his wife, who was sitting across of him, this in the living room. But while dandling the child in her arms, Aura. Yes. Today's meeting is with Marquis Guzzle. And since the crucial party is arriving late, the start of the meeting has to be postponed. Happily replied like that. Oh, I see. That's great. Wait, can I say it like that? Not great at all. The agenda was merely delayed, not resolved, so it is rather troubling instead. But it is a rare free time and it would be a waste to not use it effectively. Right, Carlos? Meanwhile, the little prince suddenly contorted his smiling face and cried woefully. Oh, what's wrong? Zenkichi? Carlos? Carlo? What's up? Half rising from the couch, Zenjirou called out to him worried, but his wife. No, everything is all right, Zenjirou. This cry means he is hungry. Answered without any agitation. Well then, time to breastfeed. Zenjirou, as you can see, my hands are occupied, so could you please get behind me and untie the strap of my dress? Yeah, sure. Upon her request, Zenjirou quickly went around the couch she was sitting on. One side of her dress gently slipped down and exposed one of Aura's big breasts. Thanks. Here, Carlos, milk. With one breast bared, the queen promptly brought her voluminous breast closer to her child's face. The baby was drinking milk with all its might while the mother held it. And the father was watching over them from a bit apart. At some point, the parents had fallen silent and just fondly gazed upon their child. Eat your fill. Now is the only time I can give you milk today. The peaceful and heartwarming scene lasted until the baby removed his mouth from Aura's breasts. What is the matter? Done already? Did you drink your fill? I see, you are full. Then the rest is for Papa. Papa won't drink it, you know. Mama, stop making scandalous jokes in front of Zenkichi. Zenjirou resolutely objected with a frantic expression in front of the mother dandling the sleepy baby. After some time, she was in a small room at the very heart of the royal palace. An imposing and long table stood in the center of the relative small, square room and various wooden chairs were arranged around it. As the queen, Aura naturally sat at the short head of the table. The only people who were allowed to speak up in this place were these with the title of either a minister or general. What? The salt is not being delivered? After hearing the complaint at the morning meeting, Aura raised one eyebrow and inquired again in a serious tone while remaining seated on her throne. Elaborate, Marquis Guzzle. Addressed by Aura, the man sitting little short of the opposite of the table, stood up with the short exclamation, "Very well." Marquis Guzzle was past his middle age. His skin was rather brown, even for a citizen of the Karpa Kingdom, and wrinkled from age here and there, but one could tell from his smooth movement as he stood up from the chair, or from his stout neck that he kept the senility away through harsh training even now. The day before yesterday, small flying dragon reached me from my son, whom I left in charge of the march. It said that the current salt supplies still had not arrived 7 days after the arranged time. The stock in the region will last for another 3 months. As my deputy, my son requests to be allowed to send our army to the Salt Road and probe the cause of it. And if I may add, I agree with him. After he had finished his concise report with a fluent way of speaking, Marquis Guzzle sat down again. The Salt Highway is known to be safest way to all territories inside Karpa Kingdom. Aura declared. With that said, we truly can't overlook this incident, Secretary Fabio added. I object. Of course it's a serious matter that the salt isn't delivered to your domain, and I have no objections to send soldiers out to ensure the safety on the road. However, that's not a responsibility for your army, but rather for the royal army. The one who opposed downright aggressively like that was General Puyol. However, Marquis Guzzle showed no signs to back off either. Yes, you're right, General Puyol. I, too, acknowledge that the Salt Road belongs to the kingdom. But taking prior incidents into account, I would say it's quite likely that the cause for the delay in the salt transport is the increase in numbers of the meat dragons appearing alongside the road. In that case, it's necessary to send soldiers to the forest and grassland around the road and kill the meat dragons that attack people. And as it happens, that forest and grassland belong to my domain. Reasoning with this theory of his, he took on the young general's gaze head-on. Aura watched how the young and aged military officers openly glare at each other face to face, which was a rare occurrence amongst confrontations between higher nobles, from her seat and sighed inwardly while she outwardly kept her composure. How troublesome. Although it is nothing new that the feudal landowners are reluctant about letting the royal army into their domains, and neither is it surprising that Puyol Gian wants to march out with the army for some achievements. Lost in thought, Aura recalled the fact that Marquis Guzzle had lost 2 of his sons in the previous war. His eldest son, a candidate for succeeding him, and his second son, who had made a name for himself on the battlefield, had fallen in battle. That son, who was currently acting as his proxy at home, ought to be his third and only living son. She had heard that he was born rather late and wasn't even in his 20s yet. Considering that, it made sense that the Marquis insisted upon settling this case with his own army. Most likely, he wants his son to get an achievement fit for an heir in a relatively harmless incident. When the failed delivery of the salt was indeed caused by meat dragons on the road, like the Marquis assumed, then their subjugation wasn't all that difficult. It was pretty unlikely that the army of the Marquis would be defeated by wild dragons, even if it was led by his third son, who had nearly no combat experience. In short, it was a beneficial obstacle spot on for someone who sought achievements. Aura mused for a while. All right, Marquis Guzzle. I shall accept your proposal. Solve this incident under your jurisdiction. Once you do so commendable, I shall reward you appropriately for your service. Her assertion also equaled that she would pay for everything later, including all necessity expenses, but he would have to assume responsibility for when he failed. Still, Marquis Guzzle considered it as a complete granting of his important request. Yes, as you command. I will not fail you. As the veteran officer lowered his head in obedience, Aura kept her arms crossed under her chest and nodded acknowledging. Marquis Guzzle quickly collected his thoughts. In the end, he replied like that and lowered his head respectfully. Aura still had more work to do after the morning meeting. The meeting concluded and she relocated into her office in the palace, bringing only Secretary Fabio with her. Fabio, draw up a paper. Aura corrected her seating posture, took a dragonskin parchment out of the drawer of the desk and ordered the secretary like that. The contents written on the dragonskin parchment pertained to the approval of the military operation in the domain for the army of Marquis Guzzle, the order to investigate the incident on the Salt Road as well as the order to eliminate its cause. Yes. Please give me a moment. Taking that parchment, Secretary Fabio headed to his personal desk in the corner of the room with smooth steps and skillfully ran the dragon bone quill over the paper. The veteran secretary drew up the document in no time and returned to Aura with the just finished draft in hand. Please sign it after verifying it. Saying so, Fabio placed the newly written document onto Aura's desk. After Aura had read through the whole paper twice and confirmed that there was nothing wrong, she put her sign at the bottom with her ball pen, versed as always. However, is that really all right? Secretary Fabio asked, somewhat suggestive. What is? Aura didn't take offense at it and urged her secretary to speak up. I mean the actual decree. In my opinion, that Salt Road justifies the deployment of the Royal Army more than enough, and I deem it unnecessary to have allowed Marquis Guzzle to deploy his army. The statement from the secretary was exactly what Aura had expected. Aura replied while she harbored this impression from which she no longer knew how often she had it up to this day. Otherwise General Puyalgian might be going out himself. If we carelessly let him accumulate achievements, his appointment as Marshal would become more realistic. I cannot really appreciate that. But when the Royal Army solves an incident in the Outlands, it will add to their track record. If all goes well, would it not present a good opportunity to position our troops in the Outlands from then on? Secretary Fabio replied. In that sense, Secretary Fabio was right. It was no bad call to make the deployment of the Royal Army for incidents in the Outland self-evident by sending out the troops for chances like this. However, Aura shook her head without hesitation. No. The problem is that once we start to reinforce the Royal Army and position a division at the border, we will have to see it through all at once. The more time it takes, the longer we will expose ourselves to other countries. Secretary Fabio spoke up. You might end up missing your chance altogether, when you wait for a good opportunity too much. I do not mind. Her reply was staggeringly resolute. However, she also understood better than anyone how great of a risk such a reorganization of the army carried. If she were to send the Royal Army high-handed into the Outlands before the armies of the feudal landowners were downsized, it could lead to a rebellion. Would it not be better to have the Royal Army ready to deploy for the unlikely event that Marquis' son fails? Fabio again countered Aura. Is that really necessary? I cannot imagine that General Puyalgian would stand on the sidelines in such a situation. Even more reason then. General Gian's achievement will only turn out all the better if the Royal Army deploys on his demand. Secretary Fabio replied. Aura hesitated to give an immediate answer to the decisively phrased advice of Secretary Fabio. You have a point there. Fine. Issue a long-term maneuver in the countryside before General Puyal can make his move. The general may pick all the personnel by himself. As you command. The provisions must be adequate for a possible round trip to the Salt Road after the maneuver. Aura stood up and stretched her arms up in the air. Good, I'm counting on you. Well then, I'm going to do some light exercise in the afternoon as planned. Thus Aura suspended her duties for today's afternoon and enjoyed some recreation with her beloved husband in the inner palace. At noontide the sun assailed with aggressive sunrays. The sound of wood clashing against wood resounded in the courtyard of the inner palace. Come on, right. It originated from the wooden sticks in Aura and Zenjirou's hands. Both sticks were about 1 meter and 50 centimeter long. Aura, wearing a light military uniform, swung around the stick, which mimicked a short spear, skillfully, while Zenjirou, dressed in a t-shirt and sweatpants, parried it clumsily. Next, left. Once again right. Naturally, Aura was holding back quite a bit, but even so, Zenjirou perceived it as a series of attacks to which not even the slightest inattention was permitted. With a desperate expression, he somehow parried the attack with the basic defense stance, which he had learned from Aura. Hey, your legs! His exposed legs were tripped by her stick and he fell hard. The soft lawn they practiced on prevented any injuries, but the fall hurt nevertheless. However, Zenjirou hadn't even the time to squirm with pain right now. Come on, you are sitting ducks when you do not move. Stand up again right away. Otherwise roll over at least. Saying so, Aura swung her stick down a few times next to his head. Okay, last one. Here I go, a downward swing. Aura raised her stick over her head in a slightly exaggerated manner on purpose, then swung it straight down at the crown of his head. Bam! The two wooden sticks clashed and made a shrill sound pretty much like metal. Zenjirou's stick, raised horizontally a hairbreadth above his head, had parried Aura's downward attack. Good. That shall be enough for today. His wife exchanged her serious expression with a smile. And announced the end of the session, whereat Zenjirou flopped onto the lawn with a big sigh that released all of the air from his lungs. A bit out of breath, Aura sat down on the edge of the fountain and, pleased by the spray of water from behind, she narrowed her eyes to slits. Meanwhile, Zenjirou was stretching all his limbs on the lawn and breathing roughly. Zenjirou, want some? As she had completely recovered before him, she took the pet bottle filled with drinking water out of the fountain and put it next to his head as he was putting his feet up. Zenjirou somehow sat up and gulped down the substance from the pet bottle in one go without sparing the time. Thank Aura for it. I'm back to life. After emptying the 500 milliliters pet bottle in one gulp, Zenjirou uttered emotionally. So, what do you say about your first spear practice? Let me hear your opinion. Aura approached him and asked that, then sat down on the rim of the fountain right next to him. Well, I knew it would be hard and didn't even once thought it would be a cakewalk, but it was even worse. Martial arts is not so plain that an amateur could prevail over an expert after all, unless you are blessed with incredible talent. If you had started to train from a young age like I did, you might have been even stronger than me by now. Not overestimating her own strength, Aura replied with a smile. Zenjirou understood that Aura was saying the truth. Ahaha, thanks. Well, I just want to keep in shape anyway and don't plan to ever make use of the techniques. A wise decision. Of course I will not stop you, if you seriously want to make an effort for it, but otherwise there is not really a reason to overexert yourself. Aura, too, agreed with the opinion of her husband and smiled back at him. Okay. It should be worth to try out a few things sooner or later. As for another matter altogether, I have been told that the development of the glass manufacture will begin in a few days. Aura informed Zenjirou about her plans. There was not much budget, so the team consists not even of a dozen of people. But they are all either retired blacksmiths or experienced blacksmiths' apprentices, so they are used to working with fire. Aura reported proudly, whereas Zenjirou inquired, albeit knowing her answer already deep inside. Retired ones and apprentices, huh? I guess active blacksmiths were out of the question. And true to his hunch, Aura showed a wry smile. Anyway, these are the only people I can assign to the development of glass right now. Needless to say, it is a simple matter to add more people for things bearing no relation to the development or manufacture, like transporting materials or building necessary tools. In the DVD you showed me, it looked like they often used a stone mortar for grinding broken bricks into powder or sand into even finer sand. Oh right, you actually have water wheels. When Aura mentioned it, Zenjirou recalled how Octavia had told him about it during a lesson. Aura raised her eyebrows a bit upon his words, but answered with a nod. Yes, we have a lot of rivers throughout the country after all. In the farming areas, they are effectively used for mills. It is just that the craft originally comes from the northern continent. Compared to their water wheels, ours are far more short-lived. For some reason, the cogged wheels soon start to make loud noises and break easily. Short-lived? Doesn't it just mean that the numbers of teeth on the meshing cogs aren't co-prime? It happened when Zenjirou reasoned like that while vaguely recalling the excursion from his math teacher in middle school. Ha! Co-prime? What does that mean? Aura's utterance was drowned out by a knocking on the door and the familiar voice of a waiting maid asking, "Excuse me?" The blonde maid, standing in the front of both, informed, "Your Majesty, it's almost time for you to return to the palace." I see you're probably right, Aura acknowledged and stood up. Zenjirou thanked Aura for her help. But, honestly, I hope you can hold back a little more next time, he further added. Your blows were really heavy and it seemed like my stick would get sent flying. Heavy. Seeing as he nonchalantly mentioned the number one taboo word for a woman on a diet, the current exhaustion must have dulled his train of thought quite a bit. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't make a mistake like this. I see. That heavy, huh? Even Aura's expression twitched. Yeah, super heavy. Each strike carried such a weight that I thought I would get blown away. I can hardly believe that you're only on par with an ordinary knight. Well, my weakness plays a part too. Saying so, he smiled innocently. Heavy, would get blown away, carry such a weight. These words were said without malice, but right now, each of them were like a dagger to Aura. Not good. At this rate, they would have their first marital strife after getting married. Aura, controlling her emotions, struck Zenjirou on his head without any warning. Ow, ow, Zenjirou cried while rubbing his head. Don't worry, I will serve you with even heavier attack next time, Aura added while walking away with angry expression. After few days. In Margrave Gajil's territory. The Guzzle army marched out during the second most unsuitable season for battles, in order to restore the business on the Salt Road that was assumed to be disrupted by these carnivore dragons. With a troop strength of around 100 soldiers, they slowly advanced north on the Salt Road. Anyway, the army of the march slowly proceeded along the Salt Road. The vanguard was composed of knights mounting big and green raptorial dragons. The whole infantry wore a thick cloak with a hood over their leather armor against the sunlight. Xavier-sama, it may be a bit early, but I suggest that we take a break. There will be a suitable place for an encampment a little bit ahead, so how about we set up our camp there? The one making this proposal while concealing a wry smile, was a middle-aged knight riding on a raptorial dragon at an angle behind Xavier. His age was probably 40-some. The knight with a deep black mustache was in the prime of his life. Isn't it a bit too early for that, Sir Joseph? I think the original plan was to cover a bit more distance during the morning. The veteran knight had aligned his raptorial dragon next to the son of his lord and spoke with a polite tone to persuade the fledgling, who was tense from nervousness and a sense of duty. Indeed, Xavier-sama. That was the plan, but the temperature exceeds our presumption today. The soldiers are already starting to become tired. I believe it would be dangerous to push on any further. I see. The young son of the Marquis, properly educated in leadership, nodded with okay, then turned around on the back of the dragon and declared to his men following after him with a voice as loud as possible. We will set up a camp at the clearance ahead. It's not that far off, so hang in there. Xavier Guzzle. That was the name of this fledgling knight. He was the third and only living son of Marquis Guzzle.